Welcome to Callosm, a podcast where science meets art. Callosm is a bundle of fibers that connects the left half of the brain with the right. According to conventional neuroscience, the left half of the brain is more logical and mathematical, and the right half is more artistic and creative. Although modern literature challenges this concept, the reason I named it Callosm is because the theme of this podcast is interdisciplinary thinking. I strongly believe that the future lies in taking a fundamental concept from one field and applying it to another, leading to new ideas that transcend the confines of a single discipline. My name is Dr. Suneet Zadav. I'm an assistant professor in anatomy and a musician who's currently pursuing a PhD in cognitive neuroscience, trying to understand how music affects the brain. While reading the latest research on this topic, I was fascinated by how much we do not know yet. And the podcast is my idea of trying to deliver whatever I read to an audience that is excited to learn more about the human brain and body, but in simpler words, so they feel enabled to live a healthier life. Lastly, being part of an independent music community, I would further love to use this podcast to help indie artists perform their upcoming art, in the hope that it reaches a wider audience. Hello. Today we're going to be speaking about something called lifestyle medicine. And while we speak about lifestyle medicine, we're also going to speak a little bit about simple changes that we can do in our life by using the right kind of nutrition, by using mindfulness as a practice in our daily life. And we'll also speak a little bit about plant-based nutrition and recent studies that speak about how they are showing signs of improving longevity through metabolic and cardiovascular markers. And I'm very excited to have a very special guest with me today. The guest with me today is Dr. Amit Aggarwal. Dr. Amit is a professor and head of the unit of the Department of Medicine at ACUHRC, the hospital where I work and the hospital where I met him. He is a fellow of the Royal College of Physicians, London. He's a visiting consultant at Vital Life Clinic, Pune, with over 2 decades of clinical experience. Dr. Aggarwal holds a postdoctoral diploma in echocardiography from the University of Vienna, Austria. An alumnus of PGIMS Rohtak, Dr. Aggarwal completed his MBBS and MD in medicine, gaining further experience at prestigious institutions like Government Medical College Chandigarh and Dinanath Mangeshkar Hospital, Pune. What really differentiates him from other physicians that I've known is his passion for integrating alternative medicine systems. In fact, he's pursuing a homeopathy diploma from the International Academy of Classical Homeopathy, Greece. He's also a Yoga Alliance certified international yoga and meditation teacher, conducting corporate training programs for renowned organizations. Dr. Aggarwal has received various accolades throughout his academic career and has published research in various national and international journals. He actively guides research projects from undergraduate as well as postgraduate students with the Indian Council of Medical Research. He holds life memberships with the Association of Physicians of India, API, and the Indian Society of Echocardiography. Please welcome Dr. Amit. Hello.
Hello.
It's so good to have you here, sir. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
I still remember the first conversation that we had. I think we were in the cafeteria and I had just come out from my research proposal meeting. I was guiding my student Samruddhi, and you were guiding your student Sakshi, and the proposal that she proposed was about plant-based nutrition. And I was so intrigued by the conversation that I had to meet you after that. And remember, I asked you, can we just grab a quick cup of coffee? And we sat in the canteen together. And the thing that we started talking about is immunity. We spoke about the bit of the controversy surrounding Covaxin versus Covishield. So we don't want to start off this conversation on a very controversial note, or maybe we do. But so could you tell us a little bit about just the concept of immunity in general as a practicing physician, and if you have observed a general decline in immunity in your clinical practice over the last decade?
Yeah, in fact, it is clearly visible because if you see the kind of overall robustness which used to be, I mean, we do see that our grandfathers or our forefathers were actually doing a lot of hard work in the fields, and they were quite hard workers as compared to the sedentary lifestyles of today's youngsters. So in a way, what I'm seeing is that stress is also taking a toll on today's youngsters. At the same time, if you see the dietary patterns, now those were the days, when you were having food maybe right from the fields, and it is needless to say that it had to be organic. But on the contrary, what we see these days, we are having reduced sun exposures. Now, there was a study sometime done back in All India Institute where they wanted to check the vitamin D levels of the resident doctors. And more than 95% of the doctors were deficient in vitamin D.
Oh, I was one of those as well. I recently was diagnosed with it. So glad to be a part of that community.
So because the reason is quite simple, we hardly go outdoors, and when we know that just 10 minutes of sun exposure it takes to have adequate amounts of vitamin D if we are exposing at least 40% of our bodies. So in a way, if you see, immunity certainly is going down, especially if you see the dietary patterns, if you see the quality of sleep, if you see the quality of lifestyle, and that is certainly taking a toll.
Right. So when COVID first struck, and the conversation we had about Covishield versus Covaxin, which we shall not speak about today for being politically correct, but after that, even after COVID, if today a patient comes to you with some signs of the flu and starts acting a little hyperactivated because of the whole COVID trauma that happened a few years ago, what would be for our listeners who might probably have a simple cough and cold right now, what would be your advice to them so that they do not freak out?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because my background being in yoga also, and I happen to be a follower of the teachings of this great master called Paramahansa Yogananda. Wow. And there he gives a short kind of an experiment which I think everybody can do. Even I have done it during, and what he said is that if you see the nasal passages have a peculiar quality that they actually excrete the excess acid. If our bodies are building excess acid, and if it is overwhelming for the kidneys to excrete it out through the urine, then this excess acid starts coming through the nose as a nasal discharge, and that is how we get we acquire cold. I remember this patient who was battling with allergic rhinitis for quite some time, and what I told her was that why don't you experiment by avoiding non-vegetarian diet for some time, let's say for a week or maybe 2 weeks or maybe a month, if you can do that, and see how does it affect your nasal discharge and the nasal symptoms. Wow. And when she came back almost after 15 days, she said, it worked like magic. And earlier she was taking so much of the common antihistaminics and maybe the nasal sprays and so on. And it was not working. But on the whole, what we see in yoga, terms is that when our bodies have to digest sometimes heavy proteins and sometimes these non-vegetarian proteins, and if our body is not having that digestive capacity, so there is a lot of acid load which it generates, and that can actually lead to sometimes a reduction of immunity, and that can predispose us to acquire influenzas and viral infections, because viruses are everywhere. So it's not that one fine day we happen to get into an environment where viruses are there, because viruses are constantly bombarding us. They are part of the nature itself. So what all we have to do is to strengthen our own systems so that we are able to defend. So when the immunity will drop, only then viral symptoms will start coming. So as I mentioned, not only the diet, but also especially if you take heavy dinners. Now that is something, another important thing. Wow. So when you take heavy dinners, now night nature has not made to actually have heavy foods. Basically night is for the rest. Right. And if you see in the Ayurveda, we talk about the solar plexus, which is the Manipur chakra, which is the umbilical area. And all the digestive power is actually tuned in with the solar rhythm. So if you see, most of our meals are during the daytime. You take your breakfast, you take your lunch, and the sun is at its peak.
Right.
But once the sun is going down, that's not the time for us to eat. I mean, we can have a
Absolutely.
light
From an
supper
evolutionary
from the
perspective,
evolutionary
yeah.
perspective, unless
Yeah.
somebody is a heavy manual laborer
Yeah.
who needs full 3 meals a day.
Right.
And that's how, if you take a heavy meal in the night, many times I have seen, in the morning you wake up and your throat is scratchy or your nose is
Wow.
congested.
That explains
And,
a lot of things going on in my life right now. Wow.
Plus a good night's sleep also, This is another thing. I'm seeing so many of IT professionals, and sometimes they have to work in shift duties.
Yeah.
They're not able to catch on their sleep, and there were so many studies, when they say that, okay, I can I can fulfill or complete my backlog during the weekdays, but it doesn't happen that way. We constantly, if you are sleep deprived, that's a major reason, one of the major reasons why our immunity drops down. And there are many studies now to support that.
Yeah. One of my favorite podcasters, who's also a Stanford neuroscientist, Dr. Andrew Huberman, keeps on talking about getting light, getting sunlight. And I mean, I understand that from an evolutionary perspective, this is so vital because our brains have been wired to respond to light. Everything that is basically happening in the body, all the hormonal systems are activated by the hypothalamus, which is in basically talking to the pituitary, the master gland. And there is so much data that supports how light falling on the retina activates the hypothalamus pituitary axis. So it totally makes sense. And what I have realized is this is a conversation that is not being spoken a lot amongst common circles, a conversation which is definitely being spoken a lot in neuroscience circles, which is the gut-brain axis. I mean, other than light, the other thing that really seems to be having a very, very important role in mental health is what you eat, like you just suggested. You just told me that eating a lot of meat can, increase acidity, which might, in alternate trains of thought, manifest as nasal discharge. This is incredible because I need to tell my followers here that in spite of being a person who's practicing evidence-based medicine, I love how Dr. Amit is such an interdisciplinary person in the fact that he is very open to alternate trains of thought, like alternative medicines like homeopathy and Ayurveda, which is the need of the day. Like I said, and like I always say in the podcast as well, the future is interdisciplinary, and there are a lot of answers that evidence-based medicine cannot answer, which alternate trains of thought can. And science has always forced us to be open-minded, and it has always thrived on the existence of questioning and skepticism. And although I am doing my PhD right now, so I'm a hard-nosed empiricist, I'll always ask about, was there an RCT, which for my musical listeners means randomized controlled trial. I've mentioned it in my previous episodes as well. And there's a lot of research that perhaps is not published in Ayurveda, or I'm not very sure about homeopathy, forgive me if I'm wrong, but in Ayurveda, a lot of these things seem to be passed generation to generation as ancient wisdom. And an interdisciplinary thinker like yourself is in the perfect position to start using the best of both worlds, the robustness of empirical evidence-based medicine into Ayurveda and homeopathy practices. In fact, let me know if you want to design an experiment with me, and I'd be more than happy to use my recent learnings, and the assistance of my wife, who's a statistician.
Yeah, we can work as a team. Yeah, of course.
Like a multidisciplinary approach towards health.
And often finding a good statistician is always a challenge.
Oh,
we have an
absolutely.
in-house statistician.
Absolutely. See, it's perfect. It's perfect. My wife would be happy to know that. So if I were to summarize what might be responsible for the reduced immunity, it would be a lack of awareness of how the gut controls the mind, and a lack of right nutritional choices, lack of quality sleep, lack of exposure to sunlight, at least a minimal exposure to sunlight. And other than that, is there anything that you feel might be contributing to this reduced immunity?
Yeah, it reminds me of this book which I read some years back, and the author was Dr. David Perlmutter, and he wrote this book called Brain Maker. And what he found in his research was that our gut regulates almost 90% of our immunity.
Wow.
And when we say gut, it is basically the microbiome, which is in the gut. All these, when microbiome is basically the flora with the gut, the bacterial flora, which are the normal bacteria which house in the gut.
Right.
They determine what is the quality of immunity that we have. And
Wow.
in order to, because there is even in the time of Hippocrates, actually, if you see, he said that 90% of the diseases start from the gut, which actually also resonates with the Ayurvedic wisdom, because in Ayurveda we also say that if you can take care of your stomach well, you can stay healthy 90% of the times.
Amazing.
So this kind of wisdom was already there in our traditional sciences, but now we are just trying to kind of unfold it by having good scientific research, and that is how we are finding now that our happiness hormone, which is serotonin, is actually released largely in the gut.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so this kind of gut brain axis, what it is saying is, and there is a good adage about it, that if you want to change your mood, change your food.
Oh,
which is
perfect.
to say that many times the anxiety and depression is also related with our gut health. Then we can actually, this is a common experience. Sometimes I tell my patients, why do you have to wait for a scientific paper which may take 20, 30 or 50 years to come? It is your experience. Let's say
Right.
if somebody is bloated or somebody is not having good bowel movements, I mean, how does that person feel that day? Usually, you feel a little irritable, or maybe
Yes.
you don't feel 100%. So you see that there is a connection between our, and on the other hand, if you feel that your gut, your stomach is absolutely light, and you feel right, they're
Yes,
vibrant and
absolutely.
energetic on that day.
Absolutely.
So you see, that kind of thing we know from our experience also.
Right.
And all we have to do is, now sometimes I tell my patients, okay, if you are having this challenge, and this guy, David Perlmutter, he noticed that when you have a plant-based diet, when you have legumes, when you have, fermented foods,
Wow.
like sauerkraut, like, yogurt, like
Yes.
having kimchi, and, that kind of stuff. So that is what the healthy bacteria in our gut like. And once the soldiers are on our side, we can easily defend the enemies, which are trying to invade our system. And largely, if you see, and this is the whole premise of, if you see the fecal transplantation which is happening these days,
Right.
and they are trying to bring the healthy flora into the gut, especially when people are battling with diseases like inflammatory bowel disorders, sometimes even certain cases of anxiety and depression. Actually, it is still, the evidence is not very robust over there, but in conditions of inflammatory bowel disease, it is already there, that FMT, which is fecal microbiota transplantation, it is helpful. And similarly, the immunity, if you see, is going to improve with that kind of thing, and the gut brain axis. This is how it works.
Amazing. For my non-medical listeners, a fecal transplant, if you already do not know, is basically they are taking somebody else's poop and putting it inside your anus or anal canal. But clearly, we don't want to get into the details of that. But apparently, these things are really helping the transplant of the microbiome, which is just basically microorganisms in the feces, to thrive into somebody else's gut, and these have now started showing promise. I will be citing a few studies of this in the monthly newsletter. I also want to mention a friend of mine who's a musician. His name is Bhushan, and very recently he got in touch with me saying that I want to change my diet, but I also want to maintain protein. And he was also looking for vegetarian or vegan sources instead of meat, because turns out it's not really working out for him. The meat doesn't make him feel good. So I suggested sauerkraut, as you suggested, which is, I think, fermented cabbage. I think it comes from Germany, but I'm not very sure the cultural origins of this food. I think it's German, but I could be wrong. And I also told him to use chickpea. And because my wife and I recently went out for a dinner date and tried spinach and beetroot flavored hummus, which is essentially made from chickpea.
Right.
And he recently got married, so his wife also is super into like trying new things out. So I recently suggested that he try to make some healthy hummus off the internet by using spinach and beetroot recipes. So I definitely need to follow up with him about that, because hummus is great with protein. It's probably it also probably uses olive oil. Again, I'm not very sure, but I hope so. And this seems like a very nice, thick, concentrated source of vegetarian protein and good fats that people can use as a replacement for meat. I just had an episode on protein intake, and we discussed this whole plant sources versus animal sources of protein, and we did not mention enough about alternate protein sources for vegetarians and vegans. So I would also use this opportunity to actually speak about one of the sponsors on today's episode, which is Amala Life. Amala Life makes incredibly efficient vegan supplements. I've been using Amala Life for about 6 months now. It's the only vegan protein bar that gives me 25 grams of protein and 20 grams of carbs. I really enjoy the taste as well. And hopefully, if you want to try a protein bar, I'm not saying that you start using protein bars as an alternate to natural foods. I've got a physician sitting right next to me who might not approve of that. But if you are on the go, especially if you're a musician, you have to like head for your sound check, and then you just have to grab something before you start dinner. You don't want to eat too heavy, but you still want to get your protein, and it has to be vegan and plant-based. You can use my coupon code Callosm20. That's CALLOSM 20. And you'll get a 20% flat discount on Amala Life protein bars. So I hope you enjoy the taste, and I'm happy to help in any way that I can so that you meet your protein requirements, especially the vegetarian and the vegan community. So if you would like to taste it as well, do let me know, and I'd love to send you a hamper.
Okay.
Right. So you have been practicing lifestyle medicine, and from what I understand, this is basically a holistic approach towards health that combines alternate trains of thought, what you eat, how you think, how you feel. Could you speak a little more about what exactly lifestyle medicine encompasses?
You see, lifestyle medicine, in fact, one of the great physicians in US, Dr. Dean Ornish, he started he wanted to actually see that how impactful lifestyle can be in conditions, let us say, cardiovascular disorders, or so he basically started with cardiovascular disorders, and 40 years back he wanted to see, because when we say lifestyle medicine, many things come to our mind, and so he just wanted to keep it simple and wanted to see how this, or how impactful this can be in patients of, let us say, coronary artery diseases. But in those days, about 40 years ago, nobody actually believed that lifestyle medicine can even change anybody's health. And so nobody was willing to give him any patients. And so what this poor guy had to do was to actually pick up those patients in which, let us say, coronary artery bypass was done, even the redo surgery was done, multiple angioplasties were done, but still the patient was having a poor cardiac health, but you could not do anything more for those patients, and some of those patients were actually put on the waiting list for a cardiac transplantation.
Whoa.
So the Dr. Ornish said, okay, if you are not giving me the routine patients, I can take these patients, because anyways no help is available to them. And so everybody said, okay, anyways, these are lost cases.
Those were good times, because right now getting the ethical approval for these things would have been a nightmare. Right? But 40 years ago, I'm sure things were a little lenient. Right?
No, they were not. They were. This is because if you go on a YouTube, you will find many stories. If you just put Dean Ornish and try to see,
we'll definitely put some links also.
What were those cases? And one of those cases I remember is this guy was having a very poor ejection fraction, almost just 10%, and this man was waiting for a cardiac transplant, and when they were put into this intensive lifestyle research, after just about few weeks, his condition started improving.
Wow.
To the tune that his ejection fraction improved to an extent that he was taken off from the list for cardiac transplantation.
Oh, wow, that's a successful treatment protocol.
So then, after doing similar researches and many randomized control trials, as you were mentioning, RCTs, he could pin down the lifestyle pointers to basically 4 things, like what are we eating, how much exercise we do, and how do we respond to the stress, and what is the quality of our relationships. So basically, these were the four things
Wow.
which he was doing, and he put it in a very good mantra format that if you want to have a healthy lifestyle, then eat well, move more, stress less, and love more. So
Wow.
this is just to remember these four things which basically sum up the whole lifestyle medicine,
Oh, I love
or
it.
maybe the crux of it.
Beautiful. So it's eat well. Let's go a little more in detail. By eating well, there is a subtle implication of plant-based nutrition as
Yes.
opposed to
Yes.
meat-based nutrition. By sleeping well, it's also slightly interlinked with waking up earlier, probably getting a little bit more sunlight and having a light dinner.
So eat well, when we say, you're right, we have to, in the study also, it was purely plant-based protein. It was,
Oh.
I mean, it was a basically whole plant-based diet.
Okay.
And there were no animal products there. And when we say move more, that is about the kind of physical activity that we do. Now, there
Right.
are many studies which say that even if you are doing 20 minutes of physical activity daily, that to 5 times a week only,
Wow.
it is good enough for us to give us 4 more years in our longevity.
Wow.
Then
Beautiful.
when we say stress less, is because stress is a part of our life. We can't expect life to be without stress, and actually stress is beneficial. If you see evolution,
Absolutely,
has not,
absolutely, yeah.
cannot happen without stress. So when we say stress less, we have to train our mind to process stress in a better
Got
way.
it. Got it.
And finally, when we say what is the quality of relationships, or is largely about having good, basically, loving people, and not living more in the head, but actually, being more helpful, being more cooperative, and seeing everybody as a part of the whole symphony of nature and symphony of life.
Wow.
Because you're a musician, so I think that term would be a better way to describe it.
Yeah, but like I keep on having this this conversation with a lot of my non-musician friends and colleagues. That when I first got into music, I was also very naive about thinking maybe everyone's like happy because everyone's like playing music and everyone's being creative. But what happens in a musical career is also that it is associated with perhaps bills not being paid on time. There's a lot of self-doubt. Lately, there's a lot of toxicity because you are really seeking validation from numbers and likes and social media. So visibility is the new definition of success. So a lot of musicians tend to kind of feel sad, and it's a little difficult for them to even confide these things. So for all those musician friends out there, I think it's important that you really, really acknowledge this little fact that you need to surround yourself with people who will believe in your music, even if you might not think it's that great. I understand, being a musician myself, sometimes we tend to be super self-critical. And it's okay to be that. I mean, it's good for you because that will probably help you practice better. It will help you immerse yourself in the discipline of songwriting or your instrument, whatever it is. But at the same time, having a few buddies who might not be musical critics or connoisseurs, but would just love your music because, it's your music. And they like the fact that, they have a buddy who makes his own music. I think you need to surround yourself more with people like these. So if there's anybody listening to this, and if you have those friends, please just like drop them a hi or put them in a comment below if there's a reel happening out of this content. But just shout out to all those amazing people who have been for us indie musicians through thick and thin at times like this. So most of the listeners of the podcast are also musicians, especially independent musicians. And I'm trying to reach out to these people to tell them that they're not alone. And a lot of non-musicians think that music is all hunky-dory and nice and, glamorous, and that is actually far away from the case. So in fact, I'm going to suggest you a couple of indie musicians who I hope you like, I hope whose performances you enjoy. One of them is actually joining us for a musical performance today. She is actually my own student, Aditi. Aditi Dahikar, and she topped first year. She's in second year now.
Great.
She's actually in third year, I guess.
Okay.
It's been a while since I've seen her, but she's going to show up later, and she's going to perform one of her original songs and one of her covers, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. So if you do, please share the material, her YouTube channel, her Instagram, with your friends.
Sure.
You don't necessarily need to give her better marks in case she hasn't given an exam with you yet. Please do not let that affect your judgment there.
We don't get biased by her music performance.
Absolutely. So once again, like you said, eat well, and for me it's also like eat less, eat early, and try to reduce meat. It is move more, which is something that I think I have been doing, and which is something that I hope a lot of my listeners really start taking seriously. There was this other incredible article that I saw on Rhonda Patrick's page. Rhonda Patrick is one of the better nutritionists out there, and she spoke of a study where they did a randomized controlled trial of people who were doing a normal workout, and then they kind of compared it with a cohort which was doing like 10 squats every 2 hours or something like that. Now, please don't get bogged by the detail, because I might be wrong here, but the premise of the entire study was that the people who squatted about 10 to 20 repetitions every 2 hours actually showed better improvements in, I think it was insulin sensitivity or one of those metabolic biomarkers. Which was amazing, right? I mean, you don't have to go to a gym. I could just be working, I could be in a sedentary job, and I could just like literally go out there and do like maybe 20 squats or like maybe 10 burpees, or maybe just hang from somewhere. All of these little things that constitute movement, perhaps not traditional exercise, but just movement, are so important. And it could be something, like you said, as simple as taking the stairs instead of taking a lift, or parking your car a little earlier and walking. Simple changes in your lifestyle can have such profound effects on your health. People just need to stop putting everything into these buckets or these conventional systems about, oh, I got to go join the gym. Oh, I got to go and like join yoga.
Yes.
That's okay. I mean, just relax, move around a little bit. Try to like be a little more open-minded about what movement encompasses, and that would really make a big difference.
Yes.
Okay.
And stop taking the lift. Today we happened to come through the stairs.
Yeah, the electricity was off before we started recording the podcast. So that's the universe trying to tell me I need to walk a little more. Great. One of the important things that I think a lot of people, especially in my age, young people tend to ignore, is the power of mindfulness and meditation. So could you speak, especially because of your background in yoga and your teachings, the teachings that you take from your teacher, could you explain, albeit scientifically, what exactly happens when you practice mindfulness? And if you could first introduce what mindfulness and meditation means, because a lot of people think it's literally sitting somewhere completely quiet, but there has to be a more open-minded, all-encompassing definition of mindfulness and meditation. So could you enlighten us with that?
Yeah, sure. So mindfulness, if I have to just put it simply, would be being in the moment. I mean, when you
Easier
say...
said than done.
Yeah.
While I sit here trying to listen to you, I'm also looking at the right side on the audio files, making sure that the audio is being recorded nicely. I'm also looking at the video camera over there, making sure that both of us are in the frame.
No, you could be multitasking, but you are in the moment. I
hope so.
Yeah. So the main thing is, see now this is also data which the neuroscientists, they have gone into and seen, like that thoughts keep crossing our minds. It is just like a constant rush of thoughts which it is going through. But at the same time, it is when we say we have to be mindful, or we have to be, or we meditate, we are trying to calm the mind, or let us say focus the mind in a way so that we are keeping it absolutely calm and silent, and we are at the same time not allowing our mind to get distracted by any thought whatsoever which might be crossing our mind. But at the same time, we should be relaxed. So it's not that you have to concentrate so much that you are fatiguing yourself, but at the same time you are not getting distracted. So this is a kind of the subject was very much intriguing for the neuroscientists also, and one of the neuroscientists which I know of is Dr. Andrew Newberg, who wanted to see what is happening in the brains of the people, those who meditate or those who do mindfulness practices. And even for that matter, those who keep their minds concentrated by watching their breath or doing a japa or doing some mantra, chanting some mantra. So he was curious, and he wanted to see, like, functionally, are there any changes happening in the brain? Or so he started taking functional MRI scans of these people, let us say the Buddhist monks and the Zen monks, and sometimes people, those who follow some certain other traditions where they do prayers and they do some chanting or japa. And when he took the serial MRIs, what he found was that not only functionally the brain was different, but even structural changes were happening in the brain. Which, since you are an anatomist, so you
I'll be happy to.
yeah,
I'll
so
be happy
you
to
will
know
be
more.
able to appreciate that structurally the prefrontal lobes in those people, those who were meditators, the more blood flow was reaching there, and even the gray matter was increasing. So the prefrontal lobes were becoming more robust, more connections, and a lot of interconnectedness was happening over there, because now we know in neuroscience that this is the part of the brain which is considered as the chief executive function area of the body. It helps us to do the decision making. And
Absolutely.
and that,
for my non-medical listeners, I just want to mention what the prefrontal cortex is. So I'm touching my forehead right now for those who are watching it on YouTube, but for those who are just listening, the prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain that is just behind your forehead and technically just above your eyeballs and the root of your nose. And this is obviously an oversimplification, but the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that is responsible for making us human. So every invention, every artistic endeavor, every creative act, every human emotion, every executive planning kind of a function is taken care of by the prefrontal cortex. Usually it's abbreviated as PFC. So for maybe we just use that abbreviation through this entire conversation. I'm so sorry to interrupt. Go on, sir.
no, that's okay. So what he found was that even after, let us say, even just 12 minutes of meditation, if we are doing for about 6 weeks, there were structural changes coming in the brain.
Wow, that's
and he
amazing.
noted it down in his research, and there's a beautiful book called How God Changes Your Brain, which is written by him.
That's a great title, How
Yeah.
God Changes Your Brain.
Because it looks like as if some priest has written it, but it is a neuroscientist who has penned down his research work over there, and he found that ultimately when the prefrontal lobes, they start becoming more robust and more connections happen over there, we have better decision making, we become calmer, and we actually feel universal love for the humanity, and so many other changes. Like, you feel, first of all, joy, which comes naturally to you, because if you see, the other counterpart of the prefrontal lobes is the limbic system.
Oh yes, the for lack of a simpler word, the animal brain, the kind of brain that is probably common between us and our predecessors from an evolutionary perspective. Yes, the limbic system.
And they have a reciprocal relationship.
Absolutely.
Because if the limbic system is active, which is basically the fight and flight responses are generated over there, it is more impulsive and more instinctive. And when you, let us say, happen to be in a stressful situation, the limbic system, especially the amygdala and all those hippocampal areas, they start firing, and one may feel kind of stressed, or he may feel like he's feeling sweaty, his BP may go up, or his heart rate may start racing up, and his sugar levels may go up. So basically this was a way in which nature has programmed us so that we can either fight with the challenge, or we can take a flight if we feel we are incapable. But in these times, if you see, the stress is not, we are not living in jungles anymore, but we are living in an urban jungle, you may say, where we have to deal with the difficult boss, let's say, or you have a financial challenge, and
those cement dust all around my house right now, because five buildings are being constructed.
That's another kind of challenge.
Fortunately, my boss is nice. That's one less thing to worry about.
So those things, and they don't go away also. I mean, if somebody, let us say, has to remain and hold on to his job or hold on to his place where he lives. So that kind of stress, if you see, if we are not able to process it, the limbic system continues to fire. And as a result, many chronic ailments, including now this same person, if he has to deal with a chronic stress, he may become hypertensive, he may become diabetic, he may start having, anxiety and panic episodes, or maybe depression, or maybe irritable bowel syndrome. And even the long run, he may have even cancers, because stress is related to all these troubles. So what this research actually shows is that we can learn to train ourselves in a way so that our brains become more resilient. And
Beautiful.
this prefrontal lobes actually is a seat of resilience also. And that is how, in the when they trained the US soldiers, and this was a news I just read in the Harvard newsletter, that this resilience actually, the resilience quotient of those soldiers is actually coming from their prefrontal lobes. And that is why if you see those monks when they meditate in sub-zero temperatures,
Right.
and you and I may start feeling uncomfortable, but because they have trained themselves that they can handle any kind of environmental stress or any kind of emotional stress, so because their prefrontal lobes are now robust enough that they can inhibit the limbic system, and you can still stay calm and focused on your work.
I love it. I love it. I have to mention one of my favorite neuroscientists and professors of all time. He teaches neurobiology and endocrinology at Stanford. His name is Dr. Robert Sapolsky. He's a total rock star, by the way. Long curly hair, has worked with African primates for like 20 years of his life. And he writes this beautiful book. I think it was one of his first books. It's called Why Zebras Don't Have Ulcers.
Oh, an interesting name, yeah.
Yeah, and this is basically about evolution. Stress, contrary to popular belief, is not a bad thing. Stress is something that we developed as a species to stay alive. It's a survival instinct. It is only chronic stress or a lack of quality recovery from a stressful episode that could lead to all of these problems. And there was another, I think, Big Think video in which Dr. Robert Sapolsky speaks of the triune brain concept, which is obviously not widely used by modern neuroscientists because recent discoveries have kind of made us think away from the oversimplification that the triune brain theory talks about. But nevertheless, it's great on conversations like these, where most people are not from a science background, to just give them an overview. And although not scientifically accurate, it could really help in understanding the three-tier hierarchy that the brain works on. The triune brain concept says that there is a reptilian brain, which is basically your brain stem, and to a certain extent the hypothalamus. And then there's the emotional brain, which is your limbic system. And sitting on top of that, at the topmost position, is your human brain, which is the reason why you act human. And they're constantly in conversation with each other. For example, you might have a pet dog, and the pet dog loves you. The pet dog is very friendly with you always, which means that the prefrontal cortex of that dog generally helps him or her in staying affectionate with his or her master, which is you. But then sometimes when dogs have, gotten pregnant, or when there's a bunch of puppies, it's scary how the same pet dog that you've spent maybe a few years with can get extremely aggressive if you go close to their baby, to their child.
Yeah.
This is a typical example of the limbic system taking over the prefrontal cortex in order to protect the species. It's a very natural instinct of the limbic drive to protect the species in order to propagate the species. So this is a beautiful example. Another example is, imagine there is and this probably comes from the same Big Thing interview, by the way. Imagine there's a lady who was caught in a fire in her house. So she's out now. The fire brigade came on time and rescued her, and then she realizes her baby is inside. Very similar, right? She knows, her prefrontal cortex is definitely telling her, if you go back inside in the fire, you're going to have some major burns.
Right.
But because her baby is inside, the limbic drive is definitely going to win in this battle, in this tug of war between, should I do what is emotionally correct or should I do what is logically correct? And there seems to be like a weird seesaw in between both these cortices, the lower and the higher. I mean, evolutionary lower and evolutionary higher areas of the brain. And it seems that one of the best ways to attain wisdom or spiritual maturity or just better control over one's mind is by tightening that screw so it doesn't shake on either side as often, if that makes any sense. This is another analogy that I think Huberman used in his conversation with I don't remember, probably it was Dr. Jordan Peterson, but I love how one must understand that in order for one of these brain systems to be dominant, the other has to be slightly submissive.
Yeah.
There's this constant give and take. And if you say that actual studies with fMRI showed better PFC function, prefrontal cortex function, that's a direct testament to the fact that this person is being able to control his limbic drive better.
Yeah.
And the limbic drive is also about hunger. You know, it's also about addiction.
Right.
It's also about sex. It's also about giving away to impulses when you go out shopping. That's why they say you got to be like well fed before you, like whenever I go out for shopping with the missus,
Yeah.
I'm going to make sure that, you know, I'm going to make sure that she's well fed. I'm going to hold her hand really tight. Everyone in the mall thinks that's so romantic. Not really. There are ulterior motives here. So it's amazing to actually see.
We should have good snacks first before you give any comment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, it's obviously almost time for us to let the musical guest in. But when we come back in part 2, I want to speak.
No, I was
about
just joking because you're commenting on your missus, and so I thought maybe first let us have this.
Yeah,
let us serve us. Let her serve us the snacks first.
Absolutely. For the listeners, she's
lest she changes her mind.
For the listeners, she's sitting right in front of us right now, and you know, she usually helps me with the framing and making sure everything's working well. So it's time for maybe somebody has rung the bell.
Yeah.
It's time to feed my missus before things get too hectic, because she knows how difficult it can be to record an episode like this in the surroundings that we are facing right now. But when we do come back, Dr. Amit, I'd love to speak about the beautiful union between spirituality and science, because you seem to be in the perfect position to have insights on both of them in order to make them merge and, you know, look at them as a whole. And I also want to emphasize a bit more on plant-based diets, and if there are any studies on longevity and plant-based diet, I'd love to have your insights on that as well. Okay, let's get to the music section. Once again, our musical guest for today is none other than your favorite singer-songwriter, Suneet Zada. Woohoo! Some of you might probably think that, oh, this guy is really promoting his own music through the podcast, but I'm really struggling with getting more musicians on board because everyone's so busy with their schedules. So if you know of any musician who'd like to be a part of the podcast, please connect them with me through social media or through my email, which is suneet.zadav.music@gmail.com. That's sunit.zadav.music@gmail.com. The song that you will listen is actually the unreleased version from the actual album, A Textbook of Bad Decisions. A Textbook of Bad Decisions releases early next year, and we're still kind of planning the release strategy, the marketing, etc. But for listeners of the podcast, you're actually listening to the song from the album. The album is done and dusted with, and this is the first song of the album called Flickers. And Flickers is about the artist-muse relationship, or an unconventional romance, which might not really be from a mating point of view or from a conventional romanticism point of view. It could be because somebody inspires you. It could be falling in love with an idea, with a concept. And it rightly ends with the line, "It's a different kind of love." This might also help us in building up for the next episode, which is going to be on romanticism and attachment theory. So once again, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of you for supporting the podcast, supporting the music. For those who are new and listening to it for the first time, the best way to support the podcast and the music is by sharing it with your peers, with your friends on social media. And hopefully, I'm also thinking of maybe doing some merch this time, get some merchandise next year. So let me know if you would want to buy any of those things. I'm actually open to discussing ideas about what kind of merchandise we could do. Right now, I am thinking of sand timers as one of the coolest things to
distribute as album art or even as podcast art, and maybe pocket notebooks for note taking and other things that kind of merge art and science. Okay, thank you so much for listening. This is the first track of my new album, A Textbook of Bad Decisions. It's called Flickers. Hope you enjoy it. Thank you for listening.
Well, you caught me staring right inside your heart, and I caught you staring right into mine. Oh, baby, you hit me like a rainstorm in the desert. Infected you with the flu of my smile. It's like we're both droplets melting off the same iceberg. So come on, let's just condense into the oceans of heart. Like we're both flickers arising from the same flame of passion. We'll light up for a moment, and could this be that moment, babe? The one that we've been waiting for, but then it just it's a different kind of love. 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 It's a different kind of love, babe. It's a different kind of love. It's a different kind of love. If you like what you hear, please support the Callosm team by liking, sharing, following, and or subscribing to Callosm. That's CALLOSM on Instagram and YouTube. You can also check out all episodes on sunitzadav.com/Callosm. That's SUNITZADAV.com/CALLOSM. Thank you so much for your time and happy listening.